Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to a new series, Reading Aristotle's Politics. Um, last week, if you weren't following this from the previous week, we just did the reading Locke's Second Treatise of Government, and there, in many ways, this was kind of a perfect kind of alternative to this. The politics is something I've done a long time. In my announcement, I explained that this is a book that I've spent most of my academic life studying and engaging with, writing through these two previous books, and now a third study guide that is released this year that I talked about, and I'll talk about at the end of the thing. We're using the Google Book of the Lord's translation of the politics. Um, I was thinking about maybe doing, uh, uh, you know, um, Montesquieu, but because I couldn't get Montesquieu here, I was thinking I'd do this for something I could get. We're using the Lord. I'm going to correct it when I think there's some corrections to be done to it. Let's start. We're going to be starting book one. The politics is divided, like I said, in 8 books. The structure of the politics is such that it is um, it's a very strange book. It's like a series. It's really more like a series of lectures that he's given, transcribed lectures in a sense we can argue, than a systematic thesis or a systematic book. It has it also works in a series as any kind of classroom. A lecture series sometimes operates as a very good lecture. There's also aspects of dialogic character of certain parts, where instead of presenting his own position, he presents alternative views and lets the views argue themselves out. You'll see this at different places. Uh, we're going to the book one. I argue in many places that what politics does, it starts with what is, he tries to define what it is, and then he gets the first attempt in book one, which focuses is kind of an organic way, and he looks for the smallest part or kind of a part, which he does interesting, which does something different than Hobbes and Locke does. Um, then kind of argues that, well, no, there's something in it, that even this is kind of, even though he does a complete account of this, um, it doesn't give you the beginning point to understand the political, what is politics. The second account is book two deals with the, he looks at the kind of the what other people have said, kind of a theoretical look at other people's theories about this, and both in theory then in practice. What is the best city in theory? What's the best political order in practice? And even that then kind of gets to a point. Then he decides to focus on the city itself, the city itself. So in first part in book one we get the parts, and a very specific part. We see the okos. The part book two we get that. In book three we get a kind of a phenomenology, which then gets in accounts of the regime, and then book four. Now this is the question. It's a big thing, and Jaeger and certain people in 19th century, Jaeger and certain other German philologists and text scholars argued that there's after book three, what should follow it is what we think is book 7 and 8, which is this account of the city we would pray for, or the best city, or the city that should be brought in. Now, traditionally, Morbick put this not following, not there immediately after book three, 7 and 8, but after book three. The only translator who does it the way the way that Jaeger, Warner Jaeger, and the other German think. I think even not yet Newman kind of translated the English scholar, English Germanic scholar Newman, who's his big 5-volume commentary in the turn of the century, last century, not this was not 1890s, 19 teens, puts it in the puts it in with, suggests that the last two books go like this. The only translator who does this is my old buddy uh, Peter Simpson. Do I have this? I should have the Simpson translation someplace here. I have all the translations. I actually wrote a review of it when it first came out in the 1990s. A very positive review. That people say will ask me why am I still using the Lord if I think, and the addition is because I think okay, this edition of the Lord has some of the is like a Simpson. They didn't have the Becker numbers on the side. The Becker numbers are these things here, these kind of things here. The Becker numbers usually are on the side and thing. But again, this is what's crappy about Google Books and EPUBs in general, is that you can't do that. I can show you what I mean by this. I'll show you. I'll just go here. You see the numbers on the side like that, and that makes referencing. This is a referencing system that works very well to you, every edition of the translation. It doesn't matter what edition you use. You don't any translation or edition. You can quote this, and it goes to the Greek text that was edited by what's his name? Famous German guy, Manuel Becker. Yeah, Becker. So they call it Becker numbers, right? The Becker numbers. Um, Emmanuel Becker's edition in the I think 1850s, 1860s. Well, the Becker numbers are really very mechanisms of how to approach the text. Um, and they are, yeah, it's Becker numbers go with this around, basically at the mid 1850s, 1840s, 1850s. Becker was, August Emmanuel Becker. Um, um, I talk about that in my this is not my this is my recent book project by Lobo that I did it myself, not by University Press, because I wanted to make it affordable. Because this is not a book per se; it's a study guide and study device. It's like Cliff Notes of Aristotle's politics. It's called a notebook on Aristotle's politics, a workbook. It's and I would recommend people using it when you're reading things because it can help. To understand how we divide the books and chapters and things like this. I talk about this in navigating the text section, where I discuss the traditional way, which was books, chapters. Books, chapters, all in Roman numerals, and then section or paragraph areas, sections or sentences. We could call it weird, and most translations don't keep the sentence structures the way it is. They break up in the Greek sentence, and it's understandable in that sense. Um, um, and that these sections are not necessarily paragraphs. Sometimes they put them as paragraphs, but in the Greek text, sometimes they don't. So again, these are not from Aristotle. The Roman mechanisms of book number. Well, the book numbers are scrolls. This is originally the original text scrolls, and divisions of there are divisions in the text. But the books and chapters and even section numbers are the earlier chronicles. Um, they're in the very early editor of the Greek and the Greek text editions. There is the first Latin translation we know of is Morbix, and Morbic does follow this divide, this mechanism, institutes, and I think he's the first one who does the modern editions of the chapters in the sense. You could argue. Um, Becker's revival has just fixed that. He takes all the different manuscripts of the politics that are known, the Greek texts, and do a critical edition of it. This is a very important thing and therefore, by doing this, he then orders the text and structures these texts per page, and then column A and column B, and then line from 1 to 40. Okay, that is the structure of this. So again, I would just point that to explain how we read the text in that sense, how to reference it. We will start today looking at book one. We will then focus very much so on the question of how he begins it, right? and we'll start book one, chapter one. That is our goal today. It's chapter one. It's a relatively short thing. It's text. It's two Greek paragraphs. Sometimes some translators merge it with the next paragraph, chapter two. Um, but let's start. In fact, anyone who read the thing, anyone who is kind of who followed me in the Locke thing would notice that there's a similarity. Locke does something similar in the beginning of his first chapter. And I think this is an imitation of Aristotle in a sense. But let's look at what he does here. Now, um, we start. Since we see that every city, and this is Lord's translation of cities, polis, that's the Greek word polis, every polis is some sort of koinonia, community. This translates koinonia in community, following Morbick's, following William Morbick. Morbick translates koinonia, the Greek word, which means common, a common gathering, something that is common. It's koinai means something that's common in that sense. The koinonia is that thing which is common to us that we share. We live together in this thing. It's a koinonia. Koinonia are different things. Morbick translated koinonia as communitas, and therefore community is a good translation of that. Some translators translate society, but the Latin word societas is not the same as communitas, and it means something. It means contractual, not something contractual, something artificial, something. This again, Friedrich Taunus's book, Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft, um, which could be, which in Latin would be communitas, societas, right? Would basically shows the difference between communitas and societas, community and society, as being the difference in this sense, and that therefore we community is. And I think Lord, in fact, this is much better than his original translation of koinonia back in the 1980 translation was partnership, which I always criticized. A lot of people criticized. Um, um, Koinonia can mean a partnership, but it means more than that. See, partnerships imply something completely voluntary and completely, contractual almost. Whereas this koinonia is something that's both voluntary and also involuntary. As koinonia are relationships like married husband and wife, a parent-child. These are forms of koinonia. The household, the family, the household, oikos. These things are a village, okay, the city, okay. Now this is that we talk about here. So he says we see that every city, we see since we see that every city is some sort of community, koinonia, and at every community is constituted for some for the sake of for the sake of some good. For everyone does everything for the sake of what is held to be good, comma. It is clear that all communities aim at some good, and that the community that is most authoritative, most ruling of all, the most authoritative of all, and embraces all the other communities, does so particularly and aims at the most authoritative or ruling good of all. That is called the polis, the city, or the political community. The polis is the political community, the politicos communitas. Okay, this is that first thing. So, what is the city? The city is a type of community. It is the most. It is the most. It is the. It's the most authoritative or most ruling of koinonia. Um, it's the Latin would be. This is what the perfectus communitas. This is that whole the perfect community. This is what people say. Oh, it's ideal. See, the perfect. This is a big thing in scholastic and Thomistic philosophy. The speaking of because Thomist is kind of working with Aristotelian's conception, and the Thomistic philosopher speaks of the perfectus communitas, the civit, the civitas, the political form, is the perfectus. The city, the polis, is the perfectus perfect means koinonia. Now, for here, he says that it's the authoritative. It is embraced. It's the one that highlights it. Now, what do we understand? How do we understand this? It's not as perfect as it's the perfect society, perfectus in that sense, in the Latin. By this he means it is that form, this polis, is the kind of koinonia that fulfills what every koinonia seeks to do. In other words, it's the perfect attainment of the end of a koinonia. And what is the end of a koinonia? This is living. Not only mere living, but living beautifully, living well. Human beings are social, as we'll see later, social animals. We are, and and the political, the polis is that place, is that community. It is that community that is authoritative, that 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 per, allows us to fully, perfectly, fully live well. Not only this mere life, but living beautifully, living well, fulfill. That's in fact, this is what the Greek word, eudaimonia means, which we often translate as happiness. It's not happiness, it's well living, well doing, fulfillment. Some people translate fulfillment is our ability to fulfill ourselves as a human being. So this is in every community, he says, what is this? Every community aims at some good. In other words, a group of people who's doing something, every community is aiming at some good. Now, good means here, we think, oh, what do this means? Some moral thing. The good, the absolute good. No, it doesn't mean, it means benefit. Yes, it's okay. We need to understand the high and the low here is not as separated. Aristotle is saying some good thing. In other words, something beneficial. The summa bonum in Latin does not really mean, in Aristotle's sense, some ultimate good we sacrifice to achieve. That all this transcendental, super duper good that we go out there, like the Platonic ideal that we strive for. Aristotle kind of mocks that in the Ethics, criticizes this kind of view of the good. His idea of the good is something attainable that we can. It is something that um, is good for us. It is beneficial for us. It is moral in that sense. The morality emerges out of it. So it's not strictly utilitarian in this sense, but it's a merger of what is the useful and the good. In other words, Aristotle has much more. I mean, it's starting with the Roman authors who wishes to distinguish between the useful and the good. Aristotle wants to. It is like with Cicero and some of the Stoic writers that we get a kind of divide between things useful and things good, things beneficial and things good. Um, Aristotle wants to argue that the beneficial and the good are the same, are fundamentally the same. And if there are differences, then what is thought to be useful really isn't. If there's a thing, it's the idea between the apparent, in other words, the apparent versus the real, the apparently good, the apparently beneficial versus the truly beneficial. And if something is truly beneficial, it is, in other words, there is this connection between the good, the beautiful, noble. The other word is noble. That's kalos, and that's what the agathos and kalos are kind of together, right? The agathos, the good, the true, the beautiful, right? Um, the noble, the kalos means beautiful, fine, but also means noble. Um, um, so let's go back here. We said that this is the political community is the community that is this is the political community is the most authoritative of all. The polis is the most authoritative of all the communities and embraces all the other communities. And therefore, it aims at the most authoritative good, the good that is the most authoritative, the most ruling. And this is what the city is in that sense. This is the introduction. He gets us to this thing. Now, Immediately after this, with this kind of general introduction, he defines what the city is, and that it's aiming at some good or benefit. That is actually a benefit that benefits us. Okay. In other words, the city is that realm which that we it's the community we share in common. We live in it, and that it gives us our sense. It provides for us the means to achieve the good, the highest good it allows us to achieve and actualize and enjoy the most ruling and authoritative good. So from that we go into a dispute. Okay, and this dispute is about what is politics or what it's not. So it's like those, and this is start that those who suppose that the same person is the expert in political rule, politicos, basileos, the kingly rule, okinomikos, the manager of the household, okinomikos, households management, okinomikos, okinomikos. That's where we get the word economics from. You get the word economics, okinomicals is the word that becomes it's household management. It was, and this was something that you had. You were taught how to rule a household, how to govern a house. I remember in high school in the '70s, early late '70s, we joked about this. People had there was a course that in high school was often called household management or household economics, and that therefore you learned about the household, and it was kind of this is you're gonna be a household wife, oh my god, and this was kind of make modern feminism, the feminism of the time was mocking it that only why would and they tended to only let girls do it. The young girls would go to the course because it emphasized cooking and running a household. It also emphasized um, doing things like um, balancing your checkbooks and things like this, which I would argue perhaps we should have back in high school again, learning how having courses in budgeting and balance sheets and what do you have to do about about saving money, planning a budget for your things, keeping a checkbook, balancing a bank account, balancing a check account, these kind of things. This is what those courses often taught, not only about teaching how to cook and stuff like that. And by the way, teaching how to cook might be something useful to know also. And it's not only women, but also men. As I joked, my grandmother, when I was a little kid, when I was a teenager, grabbed me by the ear. My great grandmother grabbed me by the ear and taught me how to cook. And her joke was, "I'm teaching you, Clifford. I'm teaching you how to cook. Why? So you don't have to marry an ugly woman. So you could, because you can't feed yourself." Okay, and no one can ever said that I married an ugly woman or couldn't feed myself, right? But there's that sense of that joke in that sense, that household economics, so manager of a household, and then being a master of say despotikos, despot. This is the word despotism comes from. Mastery, master of slave, ruling slaves, mastery, despotike is a mastery of ruling person coercively. This is the word despotic you get it from. That anyone who argues that the same person is an expert on all these things does not argue. Now this word is nobly does not argue. He translates kalos here as finally. This is something. This is because kalos can mean noble, beautiful, good. I prefer to always translate this beautiful. Do not argue beautifully. The traditional argument would be do not argue nobly. Finally, is kind of I've always I kind of like Better Eddie's turn of this is beautiful. Does not argue beautifully. For they considered that each of these differ in number or fewness of those ruled, and not in the kind of rule. For example, The ruler of a few is a master, despoticos. The rule and more a household manager, and of still more a political or kingly rule. The assumption being that there is no difference between a large household and a small city, small polis. And as for the political and kingly rules, they consider a kingly ruler who has charge himself, and a political ruler, the one who is on the basis of of the precepts of this sort of science of politics, rules and rules in turn. But these things are not true. So he just right there he said, those who consider these things, these are not true. It doesn't say some of them aren't. These things are not true. So all those things that previous sentence that people have asserted that was there, previous sentence, are not true. So it's not the political rule. What distinguishes the mastery, and I have a video on this. I have a series of videos on this question. It's the I call it the city, the household, empire. I talk about this. I have three, at least four videos thing about this question there in my previous things from years ago. That's available at the website. I also have a it's water. In the first couple lectures of on my introduction to politics course, again I had that I posted here. I deal with this kind of question also. Lecture 2, lecture 3, lecture 4, lecture 2, lecture. I think maybe lecture a little bit of lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3. I deal with this question of what is meant by this distinction. That so therefore, let's think about this for a second. That the household is fundamentally what? The household is the mastery is mastering slaves. The household relationship is more complex, and he'll go into that further in the later chapters. But he says the household is kind of mastery. It's not this number of people. It's a type of thing, a type of community. That these are different types of koinonia, different types of rule. It's not merely of size; it's kind. The difference is kind. That mastery is one kind of rule, household management is another kind of rule, and kingship and political rule. Well, these are not also different. Now, some people argue it's against size, that whereas the political ruler just is over a small entity, and a kingly rule tends to be over a nation or something bigger. Aristotle argues that no, there's an even bigger difference, and he says that he makes the line here is that well, one is this thing is that he's in charge. This is simply that one is in charge, and the other one is it's to be ruled and ruled in turn. Well, here there is something. This is where, although this is not something that he says is not true, is kind of true. The distinction, political rule and politics, is the problem of citizenship. He argues, and the citizen is one who is ruled and is who rules and but yet is ruled. He is, in other words, and the political office holder is one who rules, but he was at one time he was ruled, and he comes into holding rule in this sense, right? So an office holder, right? Whereas king is someone who's always ruler, and he is with a thing like. But there's something fundamentally different between kingship and political rule. That the nature of kingship and the nature of political rule differ. But he doesn't really go into it. I think there is a difference. There's a fundamental difference. It's more than this being that this person is appointed for life. That it has to do with the type of rule, the style of rule. That kingship has a different thing. And I've argued this before in other videos. Again, I would argue this. I think kingship is tied to something called care, love. The Christian political theory of St. Augustine, caritas, right? This idea of the idea that the king is like the father, The king is like the father. This is this is patriarchal. Now this the medieval defenders of monarchy as the like father figure. The biblical account of the father as ruler. This idea of in fact this is patriarchal. This whole problem of the defense by Filmer of trying to define divine rights of king argument that the rules the rule of a king is like the rule of the father, and it's wrong. In other words, um, and this is something that Locke attacks, but also Aristotle attacks. They kind of, but they attack it for different reasons. Aristotle wants to argue that no, it's just a different thing, it's a different phenomenon, that its political rule is completely different. It is this sharing of something thing, and that the good that political benefit gives you, in other words, the benefit, the good that you get, it's shared. It is both. In other words, the rule of a father, the rule of a father is for the okay. Let's talk about this. The rule of a master. The master rules the slave for the master's benefit. The father rules the child for not the father's benefit, but for the child's benefit. Right. So paternal rule, kingly rule, being like father rule, is like a sacrificial rule in that sense that it does not benefit the king. His rule is to serve. He's a servant, like Christ, like God. In other words, if we're going to use the metaphor that this is God's representative and that he's Christ-like, right? Remember, Christ is not only he's king as well, right? That the image of the king is God is king and Christ as God is king. But this is a sacrificial concept of rule. That the ruler is a servant. The ruler does not rule for his own benefit. Whereas the political ruler is not supposed to rule for his own benefit, but he also does benefit from it. That he shares in the benefit. The benefit is a common good. This is what is meant by the common good, the good, the benefit that all share in or partake in. So this is where we have to understand that this distinction here. So we'll go into this more, and I think this is a good point. Let's do this. Uh, um, I want to do something here, but can we see this? I don't want to do this. I don't want to move this because if I move this, okay, good. That solves it for now. This will be clear to those who are investigating in accordance with our normal sort of inquiry. Now, in other words, the normal sort of inquiry, this is kind of like we're going to be looking at a thing, we're going to define a thing, we're going to define the categories. This is something he deals with. The note in 3 to is to note 3. I'll take my glasses out and oops, easy. I dropped the pen. Oh, but don't break my chair. Big fat Bates. Um, in other words, the meaning of our normal sort of inquiry is not certain, he says, but the analytical approach alluded here by no means rigidly followed. So, in fact, this is the irony. He alludes to an analytical process, but it's not completely followed here. So, what is meant by here is kind of a strange thing. But it's usually people say this is the analytical approach. And actually, what he will do is then give the next. In fact, what will happen, as you'll see when we turn to the next chapter, will be that the next chapter then gives a genetic account. So we go from a kind of a general analytic account, right? Then we go to chapter 2. We'll talk about a different account, and that itself is and chapter 2 is a long chapter. So we're going to say, and this will become clear to investigating this in the way we normally do it. And by normal way, it's like the analytics, the other things, this basically analytical approach. And therefore, how do you do an analytical approach? The analytical approach is you look at the thing, you look at the definition, you look at the logic, you look at the structure of it. Does it make sense or not? Does the evidence, does the evidence support the thing? That is analytic in a sense. For just as it is necessary everywhere to divide a compound into its uncompounded elements, for these are the smallest parts of the whole. So too, by investigating what the city is composed of, we shall gain a better view concerning these kinds of rulers as well, both how they differ from one another and as to whether there is there is some artful experience or some science. I think episteme. Let's look at number 4 again. I should keep my glasses here. You know, I'm not using my own. This is the new version, new copy, simply because my copy is so big. And do I even have it here? Is it over? Yeah, it's over there. You can't see it. It's over there. It's bulked out like with notes and writing and everything on it. Um, yeah, Thai Tecticon. There was some techne or art of skill. So some technical, some artful expertise, or some technical skill that can be acquired in connection of each of those. So there's something technical that we're going to look at this, and it's going to be something useful, but it's technical from arts and the techne, not in other words, that we can learn something from it. The argument also is that this is not going to be. He's going to look at the parts. So the first approach of studying politics is, well, let's look at the parts. Well, in many ways, Hobbes and Locke does that, but the part they look at is the individual human actor. Aristotle won't do that. Aristotle will focus on the smallest part, and that smallest part is going to be the household. But what constitutes the household? And he will kind of do this twofold connection, and that's why he'll give a biological. The next chapter is the infamous biology, he gives a teleology, a biology, but then the rest of, as we'll notice, the rest of politics, 2:1, will seem to go on as though chapter 2 isn't written. So we'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. If you like it, dislike it, and say dislike it, and tell me why. Share with a friend, share on social media, someone else can enjoy it as well. If you wish to follow me on my social media and things like that, or subscribe first of all, you get the updates and get the notifications of the next one, and you should see one tomorrow too. I'll be producing them. Um, um, Subscribing, you'll get notification. You get it. Encourage a friend to subscribe so that it continues in that sense. And that's it for the day, I think. Oh yeah. If you want to help this channel, there's two ways. There's a couple ways to do it. One is you can do it by um, subscribe to our Patreon below. I'll try to be a good boy and do things on it. Otherwise, you can do it. Another way you can help is you can buy my book at Lulu, or it's available at Amazon and other places. A notebook for Aristotle's politics. You buy it by Lulu. I get more. I Instead of Amazon making a profit, I get a little more money from it. This is basically not the politics. It is it is not a commentary per se. It is a study guide. It's like I said, like Cliff's Notes, which kind of looks at the. Okay, I'm not going to show you. This is the one that I kind of have some additional edits in for things. Here's another clean copy, which it has like charts and things for every book. Like today, we did, like here's the book 1, deals with the chapters of this, the thematic, the breaking down, and that's kind of the outline of dealing with what we did today. And or even sketch out the types of rule a little bit, elaborated on it. And I also have like a section of Locke versus Aristotle. I go a little bit into there, and then and then chapter 2 starts over there. So I think that's enough for now. The kind of a taste of we're doing this. So again, I wish you all have a good day, and take care. Be well.